The Bench. My name is Anna. Many years ago, I was 14 when it happened. I lived in a small town with my poor family. My father was a serious man who worked hard and spoke little. He always said, "Respect older people. They know more and lived longer." I listened to him because he was my father and I believed him. I thought older people were always good and always wise. I never asked questions. I just followed the rule and believed what I was told. It was summer and the sun was hot. The sky was blue and the streets were quiet. I walked to the small store near my house to buy bread and milk. On the way, I saw an old man sitting by the road. His clothes were dirty and he looked tired and hungry. People walked past him fast. They didn't look at him or stop to speak. I slowed down and looked at him closely. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what to say, so I smiled at him as I walked by. He looked at me and gave a small smile back. His eyes were old but kind. Then he spoke in a soft voice and said, "Do you have water?" I opened my bag and gave him my bottle of water. "Please subscribe to our channel." He drank slowly and then looked at me again and said, "Thank you." He began to talk more. He said he was a teacher a long time ago. He had a job and a house and many students. But something happened. He lost his job. He lost his house. Now he had nothing, and he lived on the street. I listened to him quietly. I felt sad and surprised. I wanted to hear more. So I sat down next to him on the sidewalk. He looked at the sky for a moment and then said, "You are kind. But remember something. Not all old people are kind." I didn't understand what he meant. I asked, "What do you mean by that?" He said, "Some people are old, but they are not good. Age does not make a person kind. You must look at how they act, not how old they are." I walked home slowly, thinking about his words. My father always said, "Respect your elders." But the old man said, "Not all are good." I felt confused and a little sad. I always believed my father, but now I was not so sure. I wanted to understand the truth. I wanted to talk to someone about it. That night I sat with my father in the kitchen. I told him about the man on the street. I told him the man was once a teacher, and now he lived outside. I told him what the man said about respect. My father listened to me quietly. He looked at me, but he did not speak fast. He waited for me to finish my story. After a short silence, my father finally spoke. He said, "It is true. Some older people are not kind. Age does not always mean wisdom." I was surprised by his answer. I thought he would be angry or disagree, but he was calm. He said, "Respect is good, but trust must be earned. Watch how people act, not just how old they are." That night, I could not sleep well. I kept thinking about the old man and the things he told me. I thought about my father's words, too. For the first time, I did not follow a rule just because I was told. I began to look with my own eyes. I began to ask questions. And from that day, I started to see the world in a different way. The next morning, I woke up early. The sky was still gray and the streets were quiet. I sat by the window with a cup of tea in my hand. I looked outside and thought about the man again. His face stayed in my mind. I thought about his words and how calm he was. He had nothing, but he spoke like a teacher. I wondered how he lost everything. Later that day, I went back to the same street. I wanted to see him again and ask more questions. Maybe I could bring him some food, too. But when I arrived, he was not there. The place was empty. Only a few people walked by. I looked around for a while, then I sat on the bench where he had been. I waited and hoped he would come back. As I sat there, I watched people walk past me. Some looked busy and some looked tired. Nobody looked at me or spoke to me. I started to feel how that man might feel every day. I felt alone, even in the middle of the town. Time moved slowly. The wind was soft. I sat quietly, thinking about many things. After a long time, I saw a young boy walking near me. He held a small bag and looked around. Then he sat down on the ground not far from me. He opened his bag and took out a sandwich. He looked at me and smiled. I smiled back and said hello. He said, "Are you waiting for someone?" I said yes, but I don't know if he will come. The boy told me he came to this place every day. He said he liked to watch people. He said people were always busy and never saw him. I asked if he ever saw the old man who sat there before. He nodded and said yes. He was here yesterday. He talked to me too. He said kind things. I felt happy to hear that. The old man was kind to others, not just me. The boy and I sat together for a while. We didn't talk much. We just sat in silence and watched people walk by. It felt peaceful. I thought about how simple kindness could feel big. I thought about how people walk past each other without seeing. But when one person stops, something changes. That day, I was the person who stopped. When I went home that evening, I told my mother about the boy and the old man. She listened to me and smiled. She said, "Kindness is never small. Even if people forget your name, they remember your heart." Her words touched me. I looked at her and felt warm inside. I was glad I stopped that day. I was glad I listened. The next few days, I walked down that street again and again. I hoped to see the old man. I brought an extra sandwich in my bag just in case. But every day the place was empty. The bench was still there and the street was still busy. But the old man never came back. I started to feel a little sad. I missed him, even though we met only once. It was strange how someone could stay in your mind like that. One day, as I walked past the bench again, I saw something small under it. I bent down and picked it up. It was a notebook. The cover was old and brown. The pages inside were full of writing. Some words were hard to read. Some pages were torn, but I could see it was his handwriting. I sat on the bench and began to read. My heart beat fast as I turned each page. The notebook was full of thoughts, stories, and memories. He wrote about his students and how he loved teaching. He wrote about his small house and his garden. He wrote about losing his job and having no place to go. He wrote about people walking past him like he was not there. But he also wrote about hope. He believed kindness still lived in the world. That part made me cry. I took the notebook home and showed it to my father. He read some pages quietly. Then he looked at me and said, "This is a man with a good heart." I nodded. We sat in silence for a moment. My father said, "We must do something." I asked, "Like what?" He said, "Let's help others like him. Let's not walk past people anymore." I felt proud of my father. He understood. That week, my father and I started something small. We made sandwiches and packed bottles of water. We placed them in a basket and walked around the town. We gave food to people who lived on the street. Some smiled, some were shy, some said nothing. But their eyes said a lot. I felt warm inside every time someone took the food. It felt right. People in our town began to notice. Some asked what we were doing. When we told them, a few people joined us. They brought food and clothes. They gave time. Soon we had a small group helping people together. It all started because of one old man. A man with nothing gave us something big. He gave us a new way to see the world. I never forgot that. One evening, while walking, I met the young boy again. He was sitting near the same place with his little bag. He saw me and waved. I sat down next to him. He said, "You still come here?" I smiled and said yes. I think about that man a lot. The boy nodded and said he was special. We sat there again in silence. It was peaceful, just like before. The boy took something from his bag. It was a small drawing of the old man. "I made this," he said. "I don't want to forget him." I looked at the picture and felt tears in my eyes. The face was simple, but the eyes were the same, kind and deep. I thanked him for the drawing. I told him I would keep it safe. He smiled and nodded, then he walked away. That night I placed the drawing and the notebook on my desk. I lit a small candle and looked at them. I thought about how one small meeting changed so many things. I thought about the words, "Not all old people are kind, and kindness lives." Both were true. I began to understand something more. The truth was not simple. It had many parts. Some people grow old but not wise. Some people lose everything but stay kind. Some people pass us in silence. Some people stop and speak. And some, even if they stay only one day, leave something in our hearts forever. That was the kind of man he was, and I was lucky to meet him. Even if it was only once, he changed my life. The next month, my life felt different. I still went to school and did my homework. I still helped my mother clean and cook. But something inside me had changed. I was not the same girl as before. I saw people in a new way. I looked at their faces and eyes. I listened more. I felt more. Every person had a story, and I wanted to hear them. I was not afraid of the truth anymore. One day at school, our teacher gave us a new task. We had to write about someone who changed our lives. Many students wrote about family or friends. I wrote about the old man. I told his story in simple words. I wrote about the bench, the notebook, and the things he taught me. When I read it out loud, the class was silent. Some students looked surprised. Some smiled. I saw a few eyes shine with tears. After class, my teacher called me to her desk. She looked at me kindly and said, "That was a strong story." I said, "Thank you," but I felt shy. She said, "You learned something deep and you shared it well." I walked out of the classroom with a full heart. It was the first time I felt that my voice mattered. I wanted to keep telling stories that touched people's hearts. At home, my father asked me about my day. I told him about the writing task and my teacher's words. He smiled and said, "Words have power, but only when they are honest." I remembered how the old man's words were simple, but they stayed with me. That was the kind of voice I wanted to have. Simple, honest, and kind. I didn't want to speak to be heard. I wanted to speak to help. Soon, I began writing in a notebook of my own. I wrote down little things I saw each day. I wrote about people, smiles, and acts of kindness. Sometimes I wrote about my thoughts and questions. Writing helped me understand the world better. It also helped me understand myself. When I looked at my words on the page, I saw who I was becoming. One weekend, my father and I joined a group that helped people in need. We visited shelters and small houses. We gave food, listened to stories, and shared time. I met many people like the old man, people with sad pasts but kind hearts. One woman told me when someone listens to you, it feels like home. That stayed with me. Listening was also a gift. I also learned that helping others did not mean fixing everything. It just meant being there. Sometimes people didn't need food or clothes. They just needed someone to sit with them, someone to say, "I see you." I remembered how I felt on that bench next to the boy, silent, but not alone. That feeling was strong, and I wanted to give that feeling to others. My friends at school saw what I was doing. Some were curious. They asked me why I cared so much. I told them the story of the old man. I told them how one day changed everything. Some listened, some didn't. But one friend said, "Can I help too?" I smiled and said yes. Slowly, more joined. We were just kids, but we were learning something important. Kindness grows when you share it. I often walked past the bench again. I always looked at it and smiled. It was just a bench to others, but to me it was the start of something big. It was the place where I learned a truth I never forgot. Respect is not about age. It is about action. Kindness is not about words. It is about heart. And one day can change your whole life if you are open to it. Years passed and I grew older. Life moved on, but the bench stayed in my heart. I still walked by it whenever I visited my old neighborhood. The bench always looked the same, quiet and simple. The snow would cover it in winter, and it remained a place of peace. Even though many years had passed, it still reminded me of the important lesson I had learned that day. One cold winter day, I saw a young girl sitting on the bench. She was reading a book and smiling to herself. I stopped for a moment and watched her. The girl looked so peaceful, just like I had felt years before. I didn't speak to her. I just smiled and continued walking. The bench, in its simple way, was still working its quiet magic. As time passed, I became a teacher. I started telling my students stories, just like my old teacher had done. Sometimes I told them the story of the old man on the bench. I explained how small acts of kindness can change everything. The students listened carefully, and some of them even asked questions. It felt good to share that story and pass on the lesson I had learned many years ago. One day after I shared the story, a student came up to me. "That story is really special," she said. "I want to do something kind, too." Her words made me smile. It was amazing to see how much the story had touched her. I realized that the lesson was still alive in the hearts of others, and it would continue to spread from one person to the next. We decided to start a kindness project at school. We made cards with positive messages like, "You matter and you are important." We also collected warm clothes for people who needed them. It felt so good to give back to others. The kindness spread quickly, and soon more students joined us. Even some of the teachers noticed and started participating. It was incredible to see how small acts of kindness could create such a big change. One day, a teacher asked if we could create a kindness wall at school. We wrote our positive messages on colorful cards and put them on the wall for everyone to see. It was amazing to watch people stop and read the messages. They were reminded to be kind, to treat each other with respect every day. As the years went by, I never forgot about the bench. Whenever I visited my old neighborhood, I would always walk by it. The bench was still there, standing quietly, waiting for the next person to sit. It continued to teach people who came to rest. It always made me smile to think that the simple bench was still doing its quiet work, even after so many years. One afternoon, I saw another girl sitting on the bench. She looked content and peaceful, reading a book just like I had done years before. I stopped for a moment, watching her smile to herself. I didn't say anything, but I knew that the bench was still teaching people. It was still working its quiet magic, just like it had done for me. Now, as a teacher, I continue to share the story of the bench with my students. I show them the pictures the boy had given me all those years ago. I tell them about the old man and the lessons I learned from him. I tell them how small acts of kindness can change the world. I always end the story the same way. Kindness doesn't depend on age. It depends on what's in your heart and what you do for others. The bench taught me many important lessons. It taught me that age doesn't decide respect. It taught me that kindness has the power to change lives. And it taught me that one small lesson can be passed on to many people for many years and make the world a better place. I hope this session was helpful. Please like and subscribe to our channel for more such interesting stories. Take care, everyone.